This is Upwell, a new podcast from Only.one, featuring entrepreneurs, advocates, and leaders working to protect and restore the ocean and the planet. And I'm your host, Aaron Kinnery. This week, we have a special episode featuring a segment from a new podcast series we produced over the past several months with the incredible team at Lemonada Media. Hosted by Emmy Award-winning journalist Gloria Riviera, the new 4-part series called Discarded explores the devastating impact of petrochemicals and plastic production on communities in St. James Parish, Louisiana. The small community of 20,000 is located in the heart of Cancer Alley, an 85-mile stretch up and down the Mississippi River, where the rate of cancer is as much as 50 times the national average. Many of us have seen the terrible toll plastic wreaks at the end of its life, with only 9% of plastics actually being recycled, 12% incinerated, and the rest ending up in landfills or the ocean. In fact, a garbage truck worth of plastic enters the ocean every minute, a rate that could triple by 2040. This waste in turn ends up on our beaches, in our food supply, and even in our bodies. But what we sometimes fail to grasp is that even at the beginning of its life cycle, the process of producing plastics has a devastating impact on the health of communities living right outside of petrochemical facilities. This new series, Discarded, takes us up the production pipeline to the front lines of the crisis. We meet Sharon Levine, a mother of 6, special education teacher of nearly 40 years, and the founder of Rise St. James, an organization taking on the international petrochemical plants in her own backyard. We also meet a range of community leaders and advocates, including scientists studying the health impacts of pollution from the plants, local journalists who have covered the story for years, civil rights leaders, policymakers tackling this issue, and legal experts working with the community to stop plant expansion. The series introduces many of the people and partners we have been fortunate to meet and learn from over the years, including Rise St. James, the Descendants Project, the NAACP, the Center for International Environmental Law, and more. Our team at Only.one is incredibly proud of this podcast, grateful for the work of the talented team at Lemonada Media who produced this exceptional series, and inspired by the many individuals who share their stories and are working tirelessly to stop this long history of exploitation and environmental racism. You can find full episodes of Discarded wherever you listen to podcasts. And if you want to learn more and get involved in some of the issues raised in the series, you can check out our resource guide at only.one/discarded. And now, here's part 1 of the first episode of Discarded.
It's connection to God. He heard my cry. Because I was hurting inside because I thought we had to move. I don't want to move. When I sat on that porch and I saw the red cardinals going from the tree, they were so beautiful. And my daughter said, when you see a red cardinal, that means change. And I said, dear Lord, I wonder what the change is going to be.
Meet Sharon Levine, a lifelong resident of St. James Parish in Louisiana. About an hour's drive from New Orleans, St. James is nestled into the curves of the Mississippi River. This parish, which is a Christian word most other states in the U.S. call it county, is home to just under 20,000 people. Driving along I-10 between New Orleans and Baton Rouge, you could easily miss St. James. It's camouflaged by marshland. It's green, it's humid, and there's all that water in the Mississippi River bending back and forth as far as the eye can see. It was here, Sharon said, God spoke to her.
And I asked him, if you want me to sell my home? And he said no. And I asked him if he wanted me to sell my land. He said no. And that's when he told me to fight. That was the most powerful day of my life. And ever since that, I've been doing this work. Ever since that, he changed something inside of me. I don't know what it is, but he changed something. It's in my inner being.
Sharon comes from generations of people who have lived off this land. She raised all 6 of her kids here. She taught special ed at the local school for almost 40 years. And today, she is a devoted singer in her church choir. Sharon's connection to this land and this community is strong.
My grandparents lived on this land.
They did.
They raised turkeys with the big feathers. When I was a little girl, and turkeys were so big and beautiful feathers, turkey for Thanksgiving. My grandfather used to fish in the river right over there across this levee. My grandfather would fish and shrimp. We picked pecans during pecan season. Over there, we had more in the field where my daddy would plant sugar cane. And on the side of the house, we had a garden where we got up in the morning at 5 o'clock to go pick the butter beans, the snap beans, the okra.
It all sounds so good. But when you get off the interstate and meander through the parishes between these cities, you start to see, hear, and even smell a different story.
I used to pick the plums all the time. They used to be sweet. They're not sweet anymore.
Oh, look at Entergy. So far we've seen Dow, Oxychem, Entergy. This 85-mile stretch between New Orleans and Baton Rouge is known as the Industrial Corridor. There are some 150 plants and refineries up and down this part of the Mississippi that process oil and produce the chemicals that make up plastic. And as you're driving through these rural communities... Okay, is that a normal occurrence, that you're just driving along this highway and this huge plume of white smoke? It doesn't look like a fire. It doesn't look good. I was just about to roll down the window to see what it smelled like, but that's probably not a good idea. Driving along Highway 18 to Sharon's house, you feel dwarfed by these massive pipes that stretch over the roadway like a bridge. They come down on the other side, practically splitting property lines. I have never seen industry so close to people's homes. When we left that night and got back on I-10, those smokestacks, they kept going. The glaring high beams from the plants, we watched them fade into these distant, twinkling lights, mimicking a city skyline. In 2018, Taiwanese-based Formosa Plastics Corporation put in a big bid, $9.4 billion for 2,400 acres in St. James Parish. What for, might you ask? The Sunshine Project.
$9.4 billion to be invested by Formosa Petrochemical Corporation.
We don't talk numbers like this very often in Louisiana, and the fact that it's going to happen here along the river in St. James Parish.
It will result in unheard of opportunities for our citizens and our businesses.
The Sunshine Project sounds innocuous, doesn't it? Well, according to a Guardian article, this Sunshine Project would roughly double toxic emissions in its local area, and according to environmentalists, release up to 13 metric tons of greenhouse gases a year. It would be one of Louisiana's largest plastic factories, plopped down essentially in Sharon's backyard. Yeah, sure, it would change the character of the neighborhood, but according to environmental activists, it would do a lot more than that.
We are being slowly poisoned to death by the chemical companies that operate up and down the river.
In the late 1980s, this area was dubbed Cancer Alley by local environmental activists. Some began calling it Death Alley. They claim if you live close to a petrochemical facility in this area, you might get cancer at a rate that dwarfs the national average. So why would anyone choose to live here in Cancer Alley?
I belong here. I don't belong somewhere else. Why should I give up what my grandparents worked for to let industry come and take it? If I leave, look, all these people I'm going to leave behind. I wouldn't want to leave my neighbors here to die. So if I have to fight for me and my neighbors, I will.
This is the story of a woman who was nearly driven out of her home in St. James Parish. A woman who lost so many friends to cancer, she felt she was running out of options. Who was she to go up against some of the biggest plastic manufacturers in the world? What did she have other than her faith and her friends? Well, as it turns out, that's plenty. This is the story of how Sharon Levine took on the Sunshine Project.
What do we want? Justice! When do we want it? Now!
We are going to win. We're not going to lose.
We don't get it! Shut it down!
I'm your host, Gloria Riviera. Welcome to Discarded. I never would have described myself as someone with any connection to an 85-mile strip of land in Louisiana. And I bet the same might be true of you. I mean, I went to New Orleans for Jazz Fest once in 2003. It was awesome. Shout out to the Neville Brothers and the Gospel Tent. But that was it. That being said, a connection would come. It happened on Sunday, April 14th, 2019, to be exact. I was a pretty healthy 45-year-old woman. Someone would soon tell me I had the resting heartbeat of Michael Phelps. I haven't fact-checked that, but it sounds pretty good. Anyway, that Sunday, I went to a hot yoga class. And the last thing I remember thinking is, I need to sit down. I had 2 back-to-back grand mal seizures because I had a cancerous brain tumor called an oligodendroglioma in my left frontal lobe. I was told one course of care had an average survival rate of 10 years. In 10 years, my youngest child would be going into high school. What a crappy time for a mom to die. So yeah, I know what it's like to have a doctor look at you and deliver the news that you have cancer and it might kill you. In this 4-part series, we start with how Cancer Alley came to be and Sharon's mission to take on big plastic. We examine how we fostered an environment in the United States that often puts profits over people. We will zoom out of Louisiana and learn how plastic first entered the home and where things took a turn for the worse. While the petrochemical industry is looking to scale up production, we are highlighting the people who are working to scale it down and keep it that way.
Plastic is the nightmare gift that never stops giving.
Your garbage is coming here, and our community is having to breathe it in.
The politicians are selling us out to industry.
The industry is in denial about its responsibility to the environment and to us.
Our planet is at its breaking point. We can't put your profit over you destroying the planet.
Try to go through your day without plastic. I can't. Plastic is everywhere. To fully understand its impact, we went to Ground Zero in Louisiana, where plastic and so many other large-scale industrial products come into this world.
Do you remember what it was like before the first
For the
plant?
first plant? Oh, I heard Mom and them talking, and they were saying it's a nice thing, and they were glad. So I was glad because they were glad.
Right. Sharon was a teenager when she learned the first plant was coming to her community. She says her mom and friends thought that new industry meant prosperity for the town.
They was told it was safe, and they was told it's going to bring jobs.
Right. We met Sharon at her choir rehearsal. They practice every Thursday here at St. James Catholic Church.
Y'all can sit, if y'all want to get in the pew midway, and you can record there.
While everyone, including me, is tired from the workday, it does feel like a peaceful release just to find my place on a wooden pew and let that music fill the room with serenity. When practice is over, people slowly filter out down the aisle, and I ask, "Can we speak to you?" It doesn't take long for the subject of cancer to come up.
Do you believe your cancer was connected to living in Cancer Alley?
I can't say no, it wasn't, because I'm not 100% sure that it wasn't because where we live.
This is Mika. She's a cancer survivor, and she's the assistant principal at the school where Sharon works. Mika is warm, she's got this big smile on her face, and she's very happy to talk to us.
I love my parish. I love my community. I'm assistant principal at the school where I graduated from. I love my kids here. I love the people here.
We heard about that kind of love for community from almost everyone we spoke to.
I'm choosing not to leave because I just feel St. James is where I belong. This is where my great-grandparents lived. My entire family, both sides, were from St. James. This is me, so why should I be forced to move?
Deep family ties and service to the community are just some of the reasons people stay here. But not everyone feels like Mika. The reality is, it's just not that easy to pick up and go. Here's Lisa. She's more reserved, and I could hear the burden she lives with in her voice.
I would love to leave. I like the place where I grew up. I would love to stay here, but I would love to get away from the pollution as well, if that was possible for me to do so.
It's not possible.
I know. And it's, more people here are older people, and it's hard to start over at this age.
Yeah.
And sometimes I hear a lot of people talk about being depressed because when you think about the conditions here, it is depressing. It's like we have been cheated out of something.
Cheated out of what?
A good life, a better life, and all the other opportunities that other people have. The plants are here, but they benefit other people. They come and get the jobs here, and we have to breathe the air. That's just so sad and heartbreaking.
They have to breathe the air. As real as Cancer Alley is to so many St. James locals, a lot of people disagree. Calling it Cancer Alley, Death Alley, Industrial Corridor, or even Chemical Corridor, whatever you call it can be a political statement.
Well, back in the 1980s, a part of South Louisiana gained a nickname that was as frightening as it was controversial.
How can it be Cancer Alley if the cancer rates are not higher than the statewide average in that area?
You can walk up any street and knock on any door, and you can ask the question, has anybody here in this house had cancer? And the answer is going to be yes.
We have annual health checks and all kinds of facilities to make sure that we're okay. So I'm not sure where the term Cancer Alley came from.
It's controversial. Research is lacking, despite residents of the area maintaining that they're disproportionately impacted by cancer and other health problems due to these plants. Scientists have recently tried to investigate that correlation.
If you look at any map from the EPA of levels of cancer-causing pollution, the entire area between New Orleans and Baton Rouge will light up.
This is Dr. Kimberly Terrell. She's a staff scientist and director of community engagement at Tulane's Environmental Law Clinic in New Orleans.
It continually blows my mind that all of the pollutants we're talking about are chemicals that are known to cause health problems.
Cancer Alley residents aren't just worried about cancer. The area has seen increases in asthma, upper respiratory illnesses, and heart disease.
The state doesn't regulate the release of steam into the air. It regulates pollutants that have established health effects. So why is it that each community has to prove that they are susceptible to health problems from exposure to pollutants that are known to cause health problems?
But it's not that simple. Quite frankly, more research needs to be done into whether environmental risks equate to actual cases of all kinds of cancer. For Kim, a scientist who led a study that found a link between pollution and cancer in Louisiana, well, she's pretty firm on her view.
To me, Cancer Alley is a place in Southeast Louisiana where communities of color are disproportionately burdened with air pollution and with cancer.
Kim's convinced. And I just want to wind back a little to grasp this slow but massive heavy industry takeover along the Mississippi. I talked to a local journalist, Mark Schleifstein, an environmental reporter at the Times-Picayune, the New Orleans Advocate, who's been working this beat since the 80s.
Hi, Mark. How are you? Pretty good. Come on in. Okay.
We met Mark at his house in New Orleans. This is actually his most recent home. His last one flooded with nearly 15 feet of water during Hurricane Katrina. He works out of his home office. Reporting awards are displayed on the walls. And there's also a white hard hat he takes on all his site visits.
Chemical plants were built on the Mississippi River because there's free water from the Mississippi and there's free transportation. But you also have easy access to salt domes throughout the region that can be mined to make chlorine, which is the key ingredient for most petrochemicals.
Petrochemicals. You are going to hear this word a lot. It simply means chemicals that are made from oil and gas. They make anything from the building blocks of plastics to the chemicals that go into fertilizers. Early on in Mark's career, he pulled up to the gates of a petrochemical plant and asked to see the facility. After some pushback, he got inside with a PR representative leading the tour. He says he saw huge trucks dumping liquid waste into pits. Inside the pits were aerators, which essentially caused the waste to evaporate.
We were walking around in street clothes, and the guys who were at the trucks were in white suits with helmets and masks, and we were not feeling well, to say the least. By the time we got back, the environmental guy who was with me was throwing up at the front gate.
So, like I said, hazardous chemicals. And this was just one story Mark told our team from those early days of his investigative reporting.
One of the chemical plants that I looked at, they let us in and took us around and showed us all this stuff, and it was very well cleaned up and everything. And then as we're walking along, we smelled something that smelled like maple syrup.
Yeah, so not rotten eggs, maple syrup. The smell of chemicals comes in many flavors.
I asked the plant manager, and he said, "Oh, well, that's the pancake place in the community next door." As I'm walking back, this other worker who's like following behind us leans over my shoulder and says, "You know that's not pancake syrup." And I said, "Yeah, I know, it's ethylene dichloride." Well, ethylene dichloride is a very toxic material that's used in making plastics. It does smell like pancake syrup.
So the pancake place excuse was probably fake, but the community next door, now that's very real. And it just so happens to be a predominantly Black community that Mark told us had issued a number of complaints about the pollution, not a pancake factory. At this point, it's 1988. Louisiana ranks number 2 in toxic emissions, behind Texas. And the Environmental Protection Agency, the EPA, has officially begun to require industry to track their pollution numbers.
The result of that was 2/3 of the emissions in Louisiana disappeared over the next 15 years.
Wow, okay, 2/3? I mean, we're getting somewhere. But wait, Mark said it was 15 years. That would place us around the early aughts. The last time I checked, we have moved on from the early aughts, and we still have a big problem today.
In the last 5 or 10 years, the industry, both because there are more of them, but also because the companies themselves have expanded their size and have increased the amount of product that they're producing, we're seeing an increase in the total amount of emissions in the state.
So what happened? And where's the oversight? Mark explained what was happening in the 70s that planted the seeds of how we got here.
At that time, Governor Edwards was in charge of what was happening. Both the federal and state regulation of environmental issues was really fairly new. The industry was very interested in how to develop ways of disposing of hazardous waste and making money off of this large amount of chemical plants that were in the state.
Edwin W. Edwards, a Democrat. He served 4 times, in fact, the only 4-term governor in Louisiana history. And he was, how can I put this? He was quite the character.
Will you help me? What are we doing?
In 1972, Edwin Edwards, he was governor of Louisiana at the age of 44.
Well, I wanted to be a country and western singer, but only my mother thought I could sing.
Edwards admitted his wife, Elaine, took $20,000 from lobbyists for the Korean rice industry when he was in Congress.
We will not know which of us is to blame until the trial has been concluded.
So back in the early 1970s, these new regulations meant companies producing hazardous waste had to meet new disposal standards. Parameters! Sounds pretty good to me. But the catch is that Edwards, well, he allowed these companies to dump all of their toxic waste in Louisiana. And I will give you one guess as to, I don't know, who owned the dumps.
There's a term for it in Louisiana, Friends of Edwards.
But those slick deals, well, they finally caught up with old Edwin Edwards over a riverboat casino scandal that landed him in prison. Also, just a point of clarification here, Edwin Edwards is not related to Louisiana's current governor, John Bel Edwards. Regardless, in addition to political corruption, the Department of Environmental Quality, the DEQ, well, Mark said they seem to be doing the bare minimum. We reached out to the Louisiana DEQ for an interview. They declined, but did answer a few questions, including stating, quote, permits are issued in a fair and impartial process that is prescribed by state and federal law.
If you talk to the Louisiana Department of Environmental Quality, what they will say is that they are following the federal laws that they're required to enforce and the state laws that determine how they are to regulate the industry. The result of that is that it's rare that companies do not get the permits that they need.
In fact, Mark contributed to a big investigative series for ProPublica a few years ago. The title of the first piece was, I've investigated industrial pollution for 35 years. We're going backwards.
I think the fact that we are allowing increases in emissions, and we have seen dramatic improvements in ways to reduce emissions. For some reason, that dramatic improvement is not occurring here.
That here is Louisiana. That here is Cancer Alley. That here is St. James Parish, where we come back to after the break.
I hope you enjoyed part 1 of the first episode of Discarded. Again, you can find additional episodes wherever you listen to podcasts and a full set of resources and related campaigns at only.one/discarded. Again, a special thanks to Lemonada Media for producing this terrific series and for sharing this clip with us this week. We'll return next week with an all-new interview, an episode of Upwell. This week's episode was engineered by Jake Bowles, and our cover art was designed by Joanna Marcus at Only.one. Make sure you subscribe to the show wherever you listen to podcasts, and start your journey to help save the ocean and fix the climate today at only.one. For as little as $9, you can start planting coral and mangroves and removing plastics and carbon. Again, that's www.only.one. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll be back next week with an all-new episode of Upwell.